I passed away in the year when my love for him was at its peak, holding a fortune worth billions. He vowed to relinquish it, and he honored that promise. He stood by my side until the end. When I regained consciousness, I found myself transported back a decade. We had just tied the knot, a period when I held the most resentment towards him. I rushed to his company, caught sight of him for the first time, and tears welled up as I whispered, "Ethan, I'm sorry." After a moment of bewilderment, his face grew serious as he asked, "What is it this time? How are you planning to hurt me?" I recall that during the explosion, Ethan didn't emerge. Always so meticulous, he knelt beside me and said, "Emma, don't fear. I'll stay with you." He was 38 that year, possessed a fortune of billions, and true to his word, he gave it all up to accompany me to my demise. On a sweltering midsummer night, the sunset outside resembled flowing blood, and the hot breeze filled the room. I awoke from the nightmare, seated on the bed with a vacant stare. The clock's ticking echoed from the corner, and the calendar lay quietly on the table. "Madam, Mr. Ethan just called and said he won't be coming back tonight," the maid announced calmly from the living room. I glanced at the new wedding ring on my finger, closed my eyes, and realized I had indeed traveled back 10 years. The flames that had enveloped me before my death and Ethan's warm, steadfast embrace felt incredibly real. In those final moments, Ethan had been telling me, "Emma, don't be afraid. I've waited too long for you in this life. In the next, you must find me early." Was this merely a dream or actual reality? I pinched myself, feeling a dull ache in my thigh. The distant whistle of a train brought me back from my tangled thoughts. The shock left behind a lingering sorrow and bitterness. A misunderstanding caused by someone had led me to despise Ethan for many years. During this period, his rivals did everything to undermine him, stifling his progress. At home, my cold demeanor towards him meant he didn't always return. With his parents deceased and no close relatives, Ethan had managed a business empire alone for half his life. Eventually, the misunderstanding was cleared up, and we enjoyed several months of happiness together, even welcoming a child into our lives. However, before I could inform him of the pregnancy, tragedy struck. "Madam, the flowers have arrived. Are you ready to go?" the maid inquired. "What?" I was still lost in confusion. "The flowers? Aren't you going to visit Mr. Alex?" Hearing the name Alex made me freeze. A light bulb flickered to life amidst the haze. It was that day. Alex was my childhood sweetheart and a gifted actor, but a catastrophe had left him with severe burns, requiring prolonged hospitalization. In my former life, on this day, I had brought flowers to the hospital to spend Alex's birthday with him. As I exited, I saw Ethan in his car, a cigarette burning between his fingers, unaware of my presence. I didn't want to explain or even see him. "Emma," Ethan noticed me, extinguished his cigarette, and got out of the car with a desolate tone. "Today is my birthday." I halted, turned to gaze at him with coldness. "So what?" Ethan's dark eyes met mine silently. "Today is also Alex's birthday. You ruined his face and his future to marry me. How can you expect me to treat you?" Ethan began to speak, attempting to justify. "That was just an accident. If you hadn't invited him that day, he wouldn't be lying in the hospital now." "How can you expect me to believe it was an accident?" Ethan fell silent and finally apologized. "I'm sorry." From that moment, our relationship deteriorated rapidly into a long, painful Cold War. Later, I discovered that the accident, which even Ethan believed was accidental, was actually orchestrated by certain individuals to create discord between us. "Your things are already in the car. We should leave now before the traffic worsens." The maid returned to call me. Outside, the sun was halfway down, the light dimming. Coming back to reality, I quickly donned my coat and entered the car, realizing it was 10 years ago and everything could still be altered. The driver merged into traffic, but the road to the hospital was already congested. Shouldn't we call Mr. Alex and have him wait instead of going to the hospital? I considered, watching the changing traffic lights, and changed my mind to head to the company instead. In my youth, I disliked Ethan, and later, when I loved him, he was under attack from enemies, surrounded by danger. Thus, I never dared seek him out. Standing before the towering office buildings, I felt a bit disoriented. Which one was his office? Passersby eyed me curiously as I held a large bouquet of flowers, dressed elegantly with makeup, resembling a girl preparing for a confession. Feeling uneasy, I took out my phone and dialed Ethan's number. He wasn't even listed as an emergency contact. I pressed the call button, anticipating a long wait, but after a brief pause, someone answered with a cold, distant voice. "What's up?" Hearing his voice again warmed my heart and my voice choked up. "Ethan? Where's your office?" Unable to locate it, the passersby looked at me even more strangely. A woman unable to find her husband's office, standing on the sidewalk, crying out loud. It seemed Ethan was in a meeting on the other end. He hesitated slightly before saying, "Stop by there for today," and added, "Stand on the sidewalk. I'll come down." A few minutes later, Ethan exited the office building, his tall figure illuminated by the neon lights, dressed in a suit, radiating grace and self-possession. Looking at my reflection in a nearby window, my tear-streaked eyeliner made me resemble a heroine in a tragic tale. "Why did you come?" he asked calmly, almost coldly. I turned to see the tall, handsome man staring at me with cold eyes, his pupils reflecting my troubled expression, his face slightly frozen. Ethan was always impeccable, no matter the occasion, like a flower blooming on a cliff, untouched by blemish. "I'm sorry for disturbing you," I said, keeping my head down, not daring to meet his gaze. Today he uttered only those two words and stopped. I understood what he wanted to say. Today I should have celebrated Alex's birthday with him instead of being here. It reminded me painfully. I thrust the flowers into his arms and mumbled, "Happy birthday." A long silence ensued. I glanced at him discreetly and noticed he was staring at the bouquet, not pleased, eventually responding with a hint of bitter sarcasm. "Emma, this wasn't something he wanted, right?" "What?" I realized his mood was off and suddenly focused on the bouquet. My heart sank. Blue roses. In the language of flowers, they symbolize giving someone the stars and the ocean, which were Alex's favorites. My memory was too jumbled when I woke up. I had focused on finding Ethan, overlooking these details. "I'm sorry," I said. "Thank you for the birthday gift." Ethan's tone was almost rigid. "It's getting late. Let the driver take you home." He turned and began to walk away. Quickly, I grabbed the hem of his coat. Ethan didn't anticipate my action. He didn't stop in time, and I stumbled, crashing heavily into his back, leaving colorful fingerprints as I remained silent for a long time. Realizing my mistake, I stubbornly declared, "Ethan, I'm not going back." His expression grew serious. "Emma, how are you planning to torment me this time?" It was difficult to answer. In my memory, at this time when Ethan and I had just married, I was quarreling with him. I was 23, he was 28. The arguments were almost entirely initiated by me. I would say hurtful things, and even when giving him gifts on special occasions, I made sure to cause pain. I was like a shepherd boy who cried wolf too many times, causing him to lose trust in me, remembering that once the misunderstanding was resolved in the previous life, my approach had been more direct and harsh. I just needed to confront him. Despite appearing cold, this man was surprisingly easy to coax. But now, this method might not work. Moreover, Ethan had endured too much torment and injustice, and I wanted to make amends somehow. After much contemplation, I suggested, "Let me treat you to dinner." Ethan lowered his eyes and coldly replied, "It's not necessary. I have work tonight." "Then let's order takeout. I'll order noodles for you." Ethan remained silent, not even acknowledging my presence, still tightly clutching the bouquet of flowers. As we passed a trash can, I expected him to throw it away immediately, but he didn't. Following him, we entered his office, which was empty. A cold lunchbox lay untouched on the desk. He hadn't touched it. Was he planning to confront the past tonight? A pang of unexpected heartache struck me, and I opened my phone to order him a bowl of noodles. Clear soup, less salt, with tomato beef brisket and a few other non-spicy sides. In the past, Ethan used to order hearty dishes to suit my taste. It wasn't until later I learned he had stomach issues and couldn't handle overly spicy, oily, or salty food. After placing the order, I sat on the sofa, unsure of what to say. It seemed nothing I said would be right. Ethan was unpacking the flower wrapping to place the flowers in a vase. The blue roses stunned me. Without thinking, I walked over, snatched them, and threw them into the trash can. He paused, noticing the blood from his thumb being pricked, and sighed wearily. Emma, are you done messing around? Not yet. I held my breath, curious why he was acting so emotionless. I'll buy you something else since you don't like it. Ethan took out a tissue and pressed it against his wound, his eyes slightly lowered in resignation. Forget it, he replied. Ignoring him, I picked up the trash and left a message behind. Wait here, before hastily exiting the room. On a summer evening, the roadside was filled with flower vendors. Compared to the extravagant bouquets in high-end shops costing hundreds or thousands of dollars, the quality here was inferior. I rushed through several stalls, buying all the red roses and assembling a simple bouquet with basic wrapping paper. Just as the takeout arrived, I carried it up to the building. The 19th floor was even quieter than when I had arrived earlier. The few employees working overtime had already left. Only Ethan's office had a small light on. I tiptoed in, pushing the door open. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window with his back to me, looking desolate, like a stray dog abandoned by someone. The heavy bouquet of flowers and the takeout collided with the door, with a loud thud. Ethan stiffened and turned to see me almost being crushed. What are you standing there for? Help me with this, he panted, seemingly surprised by my return. After a moment of confusion, he quickly walked over, taking the bouquet and the takeout in one hand and guiding me to the sofa with the other under my arm as I caught my breath, sweating from the effort. I still smiled and said, "These are for you. I bought all the roses on the street for you." A moment of blankness appeared on Ethan's handsome face. Evidently, he wasn't accustomed to my current way of treating him. Did I need to scold him for him to understand? As he was about to return to his cold meal, I exclaimed, "Ethan?" Instantly, he looked over, and I caught a glimpse of nervousness in his eyes. I leaned back on the sofa, raising my chin impatiently. "Can't you eat something warm? I hate seeing you eat cold food." For the next half hour, my complaints echoed in the office. "Are you even going to eat? Can't you see the big piece of meat? Don't you eat vegetables? Are you still picky at this age? Are you just going to stare at the noodles I bought for you?" After tirelessly urging him, the steaming bowl of noodles finally disappeared. Worried Ethan might not have enough to eat, I even offered him the osmanthus cake I had brought for myself. My mouth was getting dry from talking so much when a glass of water was handed to me. I looked up to see Ethan staring at me, clearing his throat before scolding me. He seemed somewhat more relaxed now, though his eyes still lacked their usual brightness. At least the cold, guarded expression was gone. I restrained myself from hugging him and said, "Ethan, let's live well from now on." He averted his gaze, silently cleaning up the bowl and chopsticks. "Now, get dressed, and I will have the driver take you home." "But I just got here," I protested. He quickly pushed the door open and headed out, as if escaping from something. After all, taking out the trash didn't require a CEO like him. It would be a lie to say I wasn't disappointed. Handling this man seemed even more complicated after being reborn. I sat on the sofa, planning my next move. Should I just confront him? Or should I pour out my heart before making a move? A sudden phone ringing abruptly interrupted my thoughts. I answered absent-mindedly. It was a voice from the distant past, yet familiar. "Emma, where are you? I've been waiting for you for a long time. Didn't we agree to celebrate our birthdays together?" Remembering everything from the past life, I clenched my fists until my knuckles turned white. "Alex, we are childhood friends, right?" I asked, trying to clarify. Alex sensed my unease and corrected me. "Emma, we are family." "Family?" I repeated suddenly. "Don't you have anything to tell me?" He hesitated for a moment, sighed, and apologized for eating cake without informing me. Why is it that someone who cares about us can lie, make demands, and joke without restraint, while Ethan always has to stand behind and endure everything? A chill ran through me. Unable to force a smile, I replied, "I have something to do today, so I won't be able to come." "Happy birthday to you." I hung up the phone and took a deep breath, feeling suffocated. Reflecting on Alex's call before I was kidnapped, asking where I was, I fell into deep thought. He was the person I trusted the most, but what if from the beginning, The bomb explosion was orchestrated by someone we knew. Raising my eyes, I saw Ethan standing at the door, his profile hidden in the shadows, his expression unreadable. After hesitating for a long time, I asked, "Did you hear everything?" "I did. Let's go," he replied calmly, his voice tinged with restrained emotions. As the car arrived downstairs, I struggled to explain what was to come, fearing he would think I was insane. Ethan only slowed his pace slightly, not looking back. "I promised to celebrate your birthday with you yesterday, but today I am different. I am from the future." Ethan suddenly stopped, turned around, his eyes filled with ice, and said, "Enough." He closed his eyes, suppressing his emotions. "Dinner today was delicious, and I'm glad you could celebrate my birthday with me." I stared at him intently, seeing the pain buried deep in his eyes. Ethan's lips were pale, and each word he spoke seemed to tremble with extreme pain. "So you're going to see Alex now. I understand, because this is the price to pay in the past life." Ethan had once told me that every bit of goodness I showed him would be met with more pain. He never dared to hope or prepare for me to leave at any moment. That conversation now felt like a knife stabbing into my heart, stirring up a deep ache. The realization hit me too late. On this day in the past life, when I wasn't around, his dinner was just a cold, boxed meal. No one wished him a happy birthday, so he waited for me at the hospital entrance. Didn't he simply want to hear me say, "Happy birthday"? Instead, I made him stay away and leave me alone. The belated truth weighed heavily on me. He looked away. "I'm sorry for my outburst. It's not safe at night. You should go to the hospital quickly." I reached out, grabbing Ethan's hand and determinedly inching closer to him, intertwining our fingers. He stiffened but didn't pull away. Instead, he asked in a low, hoarse voice, "Emma, what do you want?" "Do you want to embarrass me further?" I raised my head, pulling his tie down. "Honey, don't move." These words seemed like a seal that completely imprisoned him. I stood on tiptoe and kissed Ethan's cold lips. The elegant scent of sandalwood was scattered chaotically, as if blown by a wild gust. I embraced his neck, soothing him gently as I pushed him against the wall. From initial stiffness to shock, and finally surrendering, he closed his eyes, allowing me to hold and comfort him. His pristine shirt became crumpled into a mess. Unintentionally, he reached around my waist, gradually tightening his grip until he pressed firmly against my lower back, bringing us intimately close. The overhead light flickered on and off, and eventually we separated in the darkness, both panting heavily. "Emma," Ethan's voice was low and strained. "Don't do this. Don't you like it?" "No," I replied. He fell silent for a long time before saying, "Don't tempt me. Go find him while I still have some sense left. Would you?" I teased him lightly in his ear, feeling wronged. "Aren't you jealous? Aren't you angry? Don't you mind me kissing someone else?" Ethan seemed provoked, suddenly lowering his head to silence my words with a kiss. He took me into his arms and laid me back on the sofa. Without waiting for my response, his large hand caressed the back of my head, venting his anger by kissing me again. My lips twitched, realizing I needed to escalate as he seemed quite resilient. But the unfolding events were spiraling beyond my control. "Ethan!" I called out, suddenly wary. "What are you doing?" My intention was to go home. He spoke warmly, I responded. "I gave you a chance to leave, but you didn't, and now the opportunity is gone." With that, I was lifted off my feet and laid over the back of the sofa. A masculine voice softly whispered in my ear, seductive and alluring. "Emma, you're in for it now." I had thought that given Ethan's character, he wouldn't go too far, but I forgot that in the past life, he was a man willing to sacrifice everything for love. A trace of savagery was concealed deep within him. I weakly implored for leniency, my request stifled between our mouths, until all I could do was feebly hold onto his neck, pleading, "Ethan, please treat me gently." Suddenly, Ethan tensed, carefully halting. "I'm sorry." I rested my chin on his shoulder, gazing up at the luminous moonlight streaming through the window. "Ethan, I've already come up with names for our child." I had contemplated it extensively in a previous life, but had never shared it with him. Emma, please don't mention it. His voice was rough, yet tender. You don't believe it? My words were met with an endless silence. I dared not hope that we could have a child together. I've chosen names for both a boy and a girl, and I'll let you decide their nicknames. Unbeknownst to me, the man who had just regained his composure began to slip back into his uncontrollable state. Ethan didn't allow me to speak again. Instead, he led me through a small side door of the office. The door closed softly behind us, the wind whispering outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. The moonlight was bright, and just beyond the door, murmurs echoed in the darkness. Late at night, irritation overcame me, and I kicked him, declaring I didn't want him. Ethan silently pulled me back, asking earnestly, "If not me, then who do you want?" I blushed and replied, "Just not you." He lowered his head. "Your words don't matter." That night, my dreams were haunted by Ethan's entanglement and a sky ablaze with fire. I found myself lying in a pool of blood with explosives strapped to me. Ethan rushed into the fiery chaos, scooping me up, trembling uncontrollably. I saw him crying as I weakly tried to push him away. "Stay away from me! Don't touch me! Please!" The dream shattered with my cries, the warmth fading instantly. I fell into darkness and awoke abruptly, tears dampening my cheeks. It had only been a dream. Coming to my senses, I realized that I had pushed Ethan to the edge of the bed. From his expression, it seemed I had been talking in my sleep. He handed me a tissue, but remained seated at a distance, avoiding my touch. My heart sank. He still misunderstood. "Ethan?" I tried to explain. "I just had a dream earlier." He listened attentively as my voice trembled. "I was in a fire with explosives strapped to me, and I asked you to join me in death." Please don't misunderstand what I said. Ethan's eyes briefly lit up, as if he understood something, then returned to silence. "Okay, I believe you," he said, covering me with a blanket, picking up a pillow, and starting to walk out. I called after him, "Ethan, you're lying." He didn't respond. I grabbed a pillow and fiercely struck his back. "All right, you can go. My whole body is sore, you two-faced jerk. Just leave me here to fend for myself." Ignoring him, I turned my back, curling up into a ball under the covers. No wonder people say young people are stubborn. The 10-year younger Ethan was incredibly stubborn, not at all endearing. After a moment of silence, the bed seemed to lower behind me, and Ethan sighed, "Go to sleep. Let's cuddle." He obediently pulled me closer, wrapping me in his arms. The night stretched on, but I remained awake, staring into the endless darkness, unable to sleep. Since my rebirth, too much information had been swirling in my mind. The person who had kidnapped me was connected to Ethan, a boss from a bankrupt company. The accident that happened to Alex was part of my uncle's plan to drive a wedge between me and Ethan. These were the things I knew from my last year in a past life. My whereabouts had always been well protected by Ethan, but how did the kidnappers find me on the way to the hospital for a checkup? The only possibility was the phone call from Alex. Even in his final moments, Ethan had thanked Alex, saying, "Without him, I wouldn't have found you." Looking back now, how did my most trusted childhood friend Alex play a role in all of this? Due to the sleepless night, the next morning I felt as if my head was about to explode. "Ethan, I can't get up. What kind of person are you?" I nudged him a few times and said helplessly, "Get up and have breakfast." "I won't eat," I replied grumpily. "You're too principled," he responded. "You don't like your younger self at all?" He paused for a moment and asked kindly, "My younger self?" "Yeah." I grumpily yanked the blanket from his hands to wrap myself in it. "I like the 10 years older you. Why don't you just age and stop disturbing my sleep?" Shifting to the coziest spot, I stretched out comfortably, feeling Ethan's scent enveloping me. I drifted back to sleep until the afternoon. Apparently, he thought I might wake up hungry, so he neatly laid out lunch on the table. The room was impeccably clean, everything in order, but my bed, a separate realm within this order, was a mess due to my antics last night. The sheets were torn and tangled, ending up on Ethan. The 28-year-old Ethan was so innocent compared to the 38-year-old Ethan. I shook my head, clearing the blush-inducing images from my mind. After a quick wash-up, I ate breakfast, wrapped myself in Ethan's shirt, and peeked out the door. The office was quiet, the computer screen displaying a video conference. The setting sun cast a soft halo through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating Ethan in his suit and leather shoes, beautifully softening his inherent aloofness. My heart fluttered, and my cheeks turned red. Ethan's insight was always sharp, and he glanced up the moment I opened the door. Seeing my attire, he suddenly froze. I coughed slightly, feeling a bit uncomfortable, before walking out with a red face and sitting across from Ethan. I checked my phone and found 5 missed calls and several messages from Alex, all from the late hours of the night. I should have been in a daze at that time, unmoved by the ringing. Could it be? I stared at Ethan in contemplation. He remained focused, seemingly unaware of my presence. I crossed my legs, swinging them around in his peripheral vision, not caring if I might be a bit exposed. Ethan's voice faltered suddenly as he took a brief pause. "That's it for today?" he said, ending the meeting. He leaned back in his chair, furrowing his brows. "Emma, from calling me honey last night, it's now Emma. Look at that facade of righteousness and refusal to admit anything. One would think he was a completely serious person. Wouldn't anyone?" I moved closer to him, sitting on a small stool in front of him, my expression serious. "I think it's time to tell you," I said, putting down his chopsticks. He adopted a posture of listening attentively. "Go on," he encouraged. With a deep sense of vengeance, I spoke up. "Actually, I've undergone rebirth too." Silence ensued, a long silence. Ethan raised an eyebrow ever so slightly. His lips pursed tightly. He seemed like he wanted to laugh. I pointed at him. "So, you don't believe me after all?" "Go on, Emma," he encouraged. I took a determined breath and recounted all the past events. Initially, he listened as if to a child's story, thinking it was a new trick of mine. Slowly, he began to furrow his brows. I knew I was right. The person who stabbed me should be an employee of your company and later went out on his own. Of course, that was 10 years ago. I don't know where he is now. Also, my uncle was involved, and that's something to keep in mind. Before I could finish my sentence, a sudden and piercing ring interrupted us. Ethan and I both saw the name displayed on the phone screen, Alex. Ethan's expression changed, returning to his cold demeanor. He stood up, picked up the plate, and I went to wash the dishes. That feeling returned. It was avoidance. He was still afraid. I gritted my teeth, grabbed the phone, and followed him to the kitchen. He had his back to the door, turning on the tap. I pressed the speakerphone button. Alex's familiar voice came through the speaker. "Emma, this might be the last time I call you." Besides voices, there was the sound of whistling wind. I immediately tensed up. "Where are you? On the rooftop of the high school building?" His voice was soft. "Emma, do you remember? The day my parents left me, you said the Smiths were not sincere to you either. We can be a family in the future. When I was 18, I wanted to jump off the rooftop, and it was you who stopped me." His voice was gentle, tinged with some regret. "But now, if you don't want me, I feel like there's no point in living. Alex, don't be impulsive." My head buzzed as I turned around to grab some clothes, putting them on. "Wait for me. I'll be right there." After hanging up the phone, I turned to find Ethan still with his back to me, standing by the sink. It seemed like he hadn't heard anything, just the sound of flowing water. I rushed in. "Are you crazy? Why aren't you changing clothes?" I pulled him abruptly, and his dark eyes stared at me. "Change clothes? It's not appropriate for me to go myself. I'm already married." I impatiently took out my phone. "Ethan, I'll give you 10 seconds to take off the apron. I'll call the police." He had gone mad. "The kids haven't finished evening self-study. What if he jumps in front of everyone?" Ethan had already stood cleanly at the door. I was taken aback. "You changed quickly." Thankfully, Ethan could drive, saving us the trouble of waiting for a driver. The police arrived at the scene and advised me not to communicate with Alex anymore. There was a glimmer of hope he might not do anything dangerous for the time being. During this period, we managed to evacuate the students from the school. Ethan drove us quickly to the scene. The wind was strong on the rooftop, unable to dispel the summer heat. The campus was silent and the police kept their distance. About 5 meters away from Alex, the police dragged me to the rooftop. "He insists on seeing you. Detain him for a while until the rescue team arrives." I glanced at Ethan, who was held back beyond the cordon. He nodded at me. I took a deep breath, climbed up the stairs, and called out, "Alex." The figure sitting at the edge of the rooftop turned his head, his burnt profile revealed. Emma, you're here. Looking at him, I felt a moment of confusion. I hadn't seen him in a long time. In past lives, after clearing up misunderstandings with Ethan, we had seen him a few times. Alex had been resistant, probably harboring hatred for many years. Suddenly discovering that the real culprit wasn't him made it difficult to let go of that resentment. Later, with Ethan facing threats, tensions rose, and I stayed at home, afraid to go out. After these past years, it must have been over a year since we last met. Alex, please come down. Alex ignored me, just looking at me. I'm sorry. His gaze shifted towards Ethan waiting outside the crowd. You're right. I was too extreme. You had told me before we got married that we'd only be family from now on. I was too greedy. I remember the days when Alex and I supported each other, getting through tough times together. When I was being bullied by troublemakers, he protected me and took the hits for me. When my uncle kicked me out, he came to me in the pouring rain, brought an umbrella, and took me back home. For a moment, I began to waver. Had he really been my uncle's killer? Alex smiled. You promised to celebrate my birthday with me every year, sing a birthday song, and I'll come down. All right, I'll sing. I agreed. The wind gradually died down as the birthday song floated through the night on the rooftop. But as I sang that song, I realized that I hadn't sung it for Ethan that day. I made a mental note to make it up to him later. As the song ended, Alex stood up on the rooftop, facing me. Thank you. It's been a long time since I heard you sing. It was beautiful. I have one more question for you. His voice was soft. Ask. I remained silent for a long time, then finally said, You're my family, from the moment you stood on the stage. That was it. Alex's deep eyes scanned the crowd, seemingly locking eyes with Ethan. The wind on the rooftop made me shiver. Let's go back, okay? Alex retracted his gaze and gave me a slight smile. Emma, I love you. With that, he opened his arms, stepped back, and fell into the endless darkness of the night. At that moment, time seemed to stand still. My blood froze. But the next moment, I lunged towards the rooftop, calling out, Alex! Only to find him gone. The pitch-black ground below looked like the gaping mouth of a beast. Alex had disappeared into the depths. I stared blankly at the dark ground. My mind went blank. There was a dull thud, and my legs gave way. Kneeling on the ground, I wondered, Alex, is he really dead? Did I wrongly accuse him? People are sensitive. Having known him for so many years, had Alex sensed my estrangement and chosen to end his own life? Did this mean I had caused his death? My body was cold, sitting there numbly, shaking uncontrollably. Suddenly, I fell into a warm embrace. The familiar scent was like a lifeline at that moment. I held onto Ethan's sleeve tightly, saying, I caused his death. He held me. You're here. Don't be afraid. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle this. I cried out, holding on to Ethan, apologizing incoherently. I'm sorry. He ran his fingers through my hair, comforting me. He's not dead. Don't cry. He whispered gently in my ear. The police have set up an air mattress below. They caught him. I closed my eyes, tears soaking his shirt. The next moment, I burst into tears. When someone dies because of your actions, self-blame can be like a mountain that crushes you. Ethan's voice was strained. It's just a few scrapes. He's been taken to the hospital. If you want, we can go. No, my voice was hoarse. I want to stay with you. Okay. We returned to the car. Outside, the police were gradually withdrawing in waves. Someone would soon take us to the hospital because Alex had no relatives. I leaned against Ethan's shoulder, utterly exhausted. Before we left, there was one last thing I hadn't told him. I suspected Alex was also involved. Ethan took a deep breath. Emma, what if he wasn't? If he was innocent, would you choose him or me? As he asked that question, I felt a sense of relief. I had always felt that Ethan considered himself the one who wouldn't be chosen, but the Emma of 10 years later would always firmly choose Ethan without hesitation. I looked up, staring at Ethan seriously. Do you remember when Alex first started out? Yeah, we didn't know each other then. By the time he started his career and became famous for his acting, we should have already broken up for over a year when I married you. I admit, at first I really disliked you. just like I disliked my uncle for intruding into my life without permission. Coincidentally, Alex had an accident on his way to dinner with investors. The driver was one of your men. I saw you as cruel and manipulative, just like my uncle back then. It wasn't because I liked Alex that I didn't like you. I didn't like Alex. I just couldn't stand someone who would ruin others' futures at the drop of a hat. Ethan gently held my hand and apologized. It was indeed my fault. I didn't think it through. No, I held onto his arm. I told you it was my uncle's fault, so you're not to blame. If anyone dares to scold you, I'll argue with them. He fell silent for a moment, then said, "Thank you." Thank you for what? For the first time, someone stood up for me. It was standing up for me. At his words, I began to feel guilty again. Ethan's family was rarely mentioned in the industry. Indeed, there weren't many people who stood up for him. Ethan looked at me earnestly. "Can you tell me, how did you start to like me?" The night was dark, but I could see the hope in his eyes. "Once you came back drunk, kicked the scarf I was knitting for the puppy. It was in the middle of the night. You sat cross-legged on the floor, figuring out how to knit a scarf for it. I told you to go to sleep, and you said the puppy would be cold without a scarf in the winter. So I thought maybe someone who cares about whether a puppy is cold wouldn't be so heartless to harm others." There was something else I hadn't told him. Ethan had talked in his sleep that night saying, "Emma, I'm cold too." My heart softened a bit. I felt sorry for him, all alone, unloved. Ethan listened intently and asked, "Are we going to have a pet dog at home?" 7 years later, on my birthday, I gave him one. He said he was too busy, never home, and wanted it to keep him company. I happily counted on my fingers and calculated that the dog must still be waiting to be reincarnated. Our dog was very intelligent, learning things easily. That made me suspicious. I paused mid-sentence. Ethan looked puzzled. "What's wrong?" I grabbed his hand. "Alex, he's just like me." "What do you mean?" I turned my head, my brows furrowing deeper. When Alex jumped from the rooftop, he told me, "It's been years since you last sang me happy birthday, but I did celebrate his birthday last year." Ethan squinted his eyes, and it suddenly dawned on him. "So you're saying you've had multiple lifetimes?" Yes, my blood rushed to my head, sending shivers down my spine as I described it. He had been waiting for a birthday song from me for many years, and this was the only explanation. Ethan and I glanced at each other, each seeing the bewilderment reflected in the other's eyes. "Let's go to the hospital." Half an hour later, the doctor told us that someone had taken Alex away. When we asked further, they refused to disclose any patient information. It was hard to believe Alex had nothing to do with the incident. On our way back, I kept pondering a question. "Do you think he jumped intentionally?" Ethan gripped the steering wheel, tapping his fingertips lightly on the leather cover. Usually, in low-rise areas, the police would set up an air cushion. If it were me, I'd be 100% sure to jump without getting seriously injured. I stared at his profile thoughtfully. "What do you think his mindset was?" He let out a sigh. "Perhaps to gain your sympathy so you would lean towards him." This was the first time Ethan had uttered such jealous words in all our years together. This was the first time Ethan had uttered such jealous words in all our years together. I bit my lip, nodding solemnly. "Ah, you really understand, huh?" He dryly retorted, "Men understand men the best." I didn't expose his facade, but gazed outside, lost in thought. 10 years in advance, warning Ethan of who to guard against might not make things worse. The image of him rushing into a blazing building to save me in my past life flashed in my mind, my heart aching. How could I not be moved? Kindness is visible. After a few hours of back and forth on the road, we arrived home late at night. The housekeeper had already left, and the living room was dark. As Ethan reached out to turn on the light, I pounced on him, pushing him onto the sofa. His long legs were forced to straddle both sides, supporting my weight. Ethan's clothes were disheveled, and he hoarsely asked, "What do you want?" "Minnie," I whispered into his ear, "I love you." His breath became erratic instantly, his Adam's apple bobbing. His hand gripped my waist to prevent me from falling off him. "No, not now," he commanded almost desperately. I raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Don't you want to?" Covering my eyes, he replied with cold detachment, "No, don't look." Darkness enveloped me as my eyelids fluttered. His warm hand brushed over my lashes. I never expected my "I love you" to have such an impact, throwing him off balance. I smirked, teasingly repeating, "I love you," like feathers tickling his heart, igniting his emotions. I leaned against his chest, feeling his heart rate quicken beneath my palms. Softening my tone, I said, "Ethan, I love you." The next moment, he silenced me. With an unusually strong kiss, he unexpectedly cornered me, inundating me with his affection that I found irresistible. His hands moved over me tenderly as if I were precious gems, outlining my jaw, neck, and providing gentle support. He listened and sighed, asking, "Aren't you hungry?" I responded affirmatively, clinging to him like a koala, my hands slipping beneath his shirt. "I'm hungry, let's eat." Observing his persistent lack of interest, I boldly pressed on. "Have you considered a name for the baby?" Ethan's eyes darkened a bit as he lifted me into his arms, walking past the dining area straight to the bedroom. The scent of roasted chicken legs caught my attention. Glancing at the dining table, my eyes brightened. Wait a moment, I thought, realizing the housekeeper had saved a chicken leg for me, but Ethan coldly declined for the first time, stating it was a one-time offer and now he was making the decision. It seemed Ethan possessed some negotiation tactics, being a clever businessman. His voice was soft in the darkness, guiding me like a vessel through rough seas. His kisses were light as feathers, dancing on my fingertips before ultimately melting into my heart. "I'm yours," I murmured, captivated by his charm, rolling over him possessively after our shower. My eyelids felt heavy, and as I cuddled him, my hands wandered freely, exploring every part of him. He was as gentle as a large dog, seemingly always calm. "Minnie?" I whispered tiredly, nestling into his arms. "Do you remember when we planned to watch a movie right after our wedding, but I got sick the next day and ended up in the hospital? Did you think I was meeting him?" Honestly, that felt like ages ago to me. Reflecting on it, it didn't seem connected to Alex. The previous day, Ethan had sent me a small cake, and after eating spicy snacks, I developed gastroenteritis. I had to get an IV at the hospital and take medication, then return home to rest. However, based on Ethan's tone, something felt wrong. My curiosity was piqued. "How did you come to believe that I visited Alex?" Logically, with his skills, he could easily track where I was and knew I was hospitalized. Yet he didn't check. After a short silence, Ethan admitted openly, "I can view Alex's Instagram, but Alex rarely uses it, right?" We locked eyes, both suspicious. Ethan took out his phone and handed it to me eagerly. I opened Alex's profile, but upon seeing its contents, my mind raced. Today, Emma had mentioned wanting to celebrate my birthday. I was grateful for my loved ones and enjoyed Emma's homemade meals, just like before. I scrolled frantically, recalling a post from 6 months ago about a movie release and waiting for Emma to arrive. It was the day I had gastroenteritis. When I opened my phone, Alex's Instagram was empty. These posts were only visible to Ethan. Since our marriage, I rarely interacted with Alex, mostly receiving hospital calls for payments or therapy adjustments. I genuinely saw him as an old friend, but he had repeatedly hurt my loved ones behind my back. Frustrated, I massaged my temples. How could you trust him? There's not even a picture of me on his account. Ethan looked down, staring at the empty Instagram feed on my phone, a hint of realization dawning in his eyes. I hesitated to disbelieve, repeatedly clicking and exiting Alex's profile as if confirming something, an unconscious reaction upon seeing the truth. I feared that if I investigated and discovered you were indeed at the movie theater with him, I would rather remain unaware. Angry and conflicted, I pleaded, "You could have at least asked me." Caught off guard, I paused abruptly. Yes, he didn't dare to ask. Back then, I often lashed out at him harshly. The answers he received wouldn't have been much better than his suspicions. "I'm sorry." I buried my head in Ethan's chest, tears stinging my eyes. "I won't snap at you again, ever." He chuckled softly, kissing my ear. "No, don't be. I love your fiery side. It's endearing. Just don't say you don't need my care anymore." That night, the final trace of detachment between us disappeared. I suspected Ethan had a slight masochistic streak. He seemed uneasy without a reprimand. One particular morning, I erupted once more. Ethan, do you want to exhaust yourself at the office just so I can present you with a dedicated employee award? On the phone, Ethan's alluring voice turned husky with a nasal undertone. I can handle it, he replied. He had a high fever the previous night, burning up all over. I called the family doctor, obtained fever reducers, and encouraged him to take them, half persuading, half forcing him to comply. I also helped wash his body with a basin. As dawn approached, his fever subsided. I prepared a light meal based on the housekeeper's menu, planning for Ethan to eat when he woke up and then fall asleep. As he dozed in my arms, he opened his eyes at 10 o'clock and had already left for work, perhaps influenced by past life shadows. Concerned for his safety, after a simple breakfast, I packed the housekeeper-made lunchbox and rushed to his office. Upon seeing me, the secretary nervously stood up. The boss is in a meeting and can't be disturbed. That's okay, I'll wait, I replied, sitting on the lobby sofa and fiddling with my phone. Gradually, I overheard Ethan speaking to someone, his tone unusually cold and sharp. I gave you a chance, but you didn't take it. Ethan, you're clearly trying to make me make a mistake on purpose. Ethan lightly chuckled. So what if I am? You're being unreasonable. I'm a business person, solely interested in profit. I never bother with reasoning when dealing with people. I rested my chin on my hand, listening attentively as the secretary looked terrified. Suddenly, the door burst open, and an angry middle-aged man stormed out. As he left, he glanced at me inadvertently, and I was stunned. This person, wasn't he the one who had hurt me in my past life? Could it be that Ethan had already begun taking action 10 years ahead of schedule? He truly was a man of action. The secretary was sweating profusely, raising her voice. Boss, your wife is here. I snapped back to reality, picked up the lunchbox, and walked inside. But I didn't see the ruthless man who dominated the workplace. Instead, Ethan was sitting by the window, his white shirt immaculate, smiling gently at me. I'll be back for lunch. I placed the lunchbox on his desk and sat opposite him. Did I just startle you? He chuckled softly. I'm sorry, I'll watch my tone next time. No, I scratched my head. This person, the one I mentioned last time, the one who hurt me. A flicker of ice flashed in Ethan's eyes. He simply said, just hand him over to me, and then focused on eating seriously. The timing was perfect, and the lunch was still warm. He truly had good manners. Even his mealtime was impressive. Seeing me still staring, Ethan paused and asked, Do you want to eat with me? No, I hesitated, leaning forward slightly. That person... Ethan paused again and sighed. Do you want to buy a bag or some clothes? You can use the card I gave you, or wait for me to finish work and accompany you. I bit my lip, feeling my ears flush red. Could you please speak to me in the same tone as before? What? I covered my face, almost shrinking under the table. Please, I really fell for that. Ethan swallowed his food and suddenly smiled. I blushed and shyly nudged him. Don't laugh at me. Forget what I said. I won't forget. He stared at me. I can never refuse any of your requests. That day, people at his company saw me blushing like an apple as I rushed out of the office, tangled in the past and present lives for so many years. Only recently did it start to feel like a warm love. I took over Ethan's Instagram account, occasionally posting failed kitchen attempts and blurry couple photos taken on impulse with sarcastic captions. Ethan gently remarked, Actually, I still have friends, which was somewhat embarrassing, but as he saw me enjoying myself, he accepted everyone's teasing. Each Instagram post garnered a few common comments like, Here comes the wife picture again. Time flew by, and before I knew it, it was deep autumn. Alex seemed to have vanished from my life. His phone number was deactivated, cutting off all contact. Sometimes when I saw high school students leaving school, I would reminisce about the past, but my intuition told me things wouldn't end so simply. Ethan became extremely busy, leaving early and returning late. Sometimes when I waited for him at home, I thought of the past. He was always busy, with little time to talk to me. Madam, it's 10 o'clock. You should go to bed early. I sat cross-legged on the carpet, surrounded by newly bought items. Just a little longer, I realized I hadn't seen him face to face for a week. Tonight, I suddenly wanted to wait for him. As the weather grew colder, I went to the mall and bought Ethan a set of winter clothes, a camel plaid scarf, a wool coat, and matching couple gloves that were a bit childish, similar to mine. While putting the clothes away in the closet, I suddenly felt a vibration from his coat. I took it out and saw an email. I took a picture and sent him a teasing message. "Ethan, how come you have a phone that nobody knows about?" He was already accustomed to my occasional silly jokes and replied, "It's for work. I forgot to bring it. Could you open it and check?" I opened the email and muttered, "I hope it's not a love letter from someone else, or I'll be upset." The interface changed, displaying a medical report. Squinting, I read it closely. Skull fracture and intracranial hemorrhage. It seemed he had been hit by something, with a death report below. An accident at work. "It's really unfortunate." After hearing this, Ethan gently said, "Okay, put the phone back. I'll buy you a small cake when I return home. Just now you said I could look freely, but there's really nothing interesting to see." He reheated the food in the kitchen for him and returned the phone. Then I took out the wrapping paper, intending to wrap the new clothes as a surprise gift. My best friend Vivian teased me over the phone. "You used to annoy people to death, Emma. Have you changed? Ethan is the best in our family. Weren't you blind back then?" Okay. When are you going to start a studio partnership with me? Do you know how hard it is to get your design drafts?" I hesitated, replying, "Let's wait a bit longer. I can provide you with design drafts at home. Just be with your Ethan." I admitted that I wanted to spend more time with him. If there were no changes, we would eventually move towards death together, day by day, diminishing. Ethan came home on time. I left a small lamp lit in the living room, with a still warm clay pot. I curled up in the corner of the sofa, holding my breath. Ethan softly called out, "Emma," but I didn't respond. I slinked behind him and suddenly jumped onto his shoulders. "Ethan," he held me tightly, ensuring I didn't fall. "Why aren't you scared?" I saw his shadow, helplessly clinging to him. I whispered, "Go to the bedroom. I have a gift for you." As he took me to the bedroom, a misshapen giant gift box sat in the center. "What's this? It's your belated birthday present." "It's not even handmade by me this year. I'm really not satisfied. All this money, I earned it by working hard on drafting designs." I slipped off his back, presenting the gift to him. "Open it and see." Ethan lowered his eyes, hesitating for a moment. "There's something I want to discuss with you." "Say it." He struggled to speak, then finally said, "Maybe we need to separate for a while." I was stunned for a few moments, thinking I was still dreaming. But as it sank in, I slowly, word by word, asked, "Do you want a divorce from me?" Struggling to control his emotions, Ethan began to speak, but I abruptly stood up. "I understand. I'll go pack my things." Emma." Ethan grabbed me, patiently listening. "Please, listen to me." I was on the verge of tears, not turning around, afraid to cry and embarrass myself. "Just say it like this. Actually, even if you don't, I know it. I have hurt you, and you were only with me to retaliate. I shouldn't have insulted you by calling you a disgusting little ghost when we got married or made you wait outside the movie theater for 2 hours. I shouldn't have known you like cleanliness and secretly spread jam on your white shirt. It serves me right." The person behind me suddenly fell silent. "You spread jam where?" "On the shirt and the bedsheet." "When was this?" "Just not long after we got married. I wanted to take revenge on you." The room went silent again. The next moment, I found myself sprawled across Ethan's lap, a sharp slap landing on my lower back, tingling and numbing. With tears in my eyes, I cried out plaintively, "I didn't know I would be abused before you mentioned a divorce. Help! I didn't even use much force." Ethan laughed. "Emma, are you being childish?" I struggled hard, unwilling to show weakness. "According to the principles of success, you have to hit your opponent's weakest point directly. And you like cleanliness, right? I'll dirty your bedsheets. We're getting divorced, and I'll make a mess again." Another slap landed. My face burned bright red. "Ethan, you're humiliating me. Give me a clean break." "A clean break?" "Afraid you can't handle it." He lifted me up, suppressing my struggles and holding back my resistance with a serious expression. Okay, stop crying. I need to talk to you seriously. You have to act with me. What play? Bob is Alex's dad. Ethan got straight to the point. The email you saw just now is about his dad's death in a workplace accident. That project many years ago was a collaboration between your uncle and my dad. I suddenly recalled the day I went to the rooftop to find Alex. He stood there, his white shirt billowing in the wind like a raised white sail, holding an ice cream stick. I called out, "Alex, what are you doing up there?" He turned back, despair written all over his clean face. My family is dead. I have no family left. I was shocked by his family's situation. Carefully, I approached and handed him an ice cream stick, saying, "I have no family either. How about me?" He looked at me and said solemnly, "This is from when they locked me in the girls' bathroom and hit me." Taking the ice cream stick, I heard him say, "My uncle only scolds me for causing trouble. He doesn't care about me." Alex looked at my bruised arms, tipped the ice cream stick, and jumped down from the edge. "What's your uncle's name?" "Richard." Alex raised his head slowly. "Richard? The Richard from the Sangs group?" He looked at me with an unprecedentedly serious expression and said, "Don't worry, I'll treat you well in the future." Lost in memories, it took me many years to suddenly understand the meaning of that look. Perhaps in the moment before he learned his uncle's name, Alex truly wanted to treat me as family. But my relationship with the Smiths could help him open the door to revenge. He spent many years teaching me that family would never betray you, and if family was harmed, it must be repaid 1,000-fold. But initially, his promise was built on lies. Ethan said, "Emma, I can see that Alex likes you. You said in your past life you were killed by someone. And with Alex's help, perhaps because you chose me, I can't let you continue being tied to me, to gamble on. You have no connection with the Smiths. Alex should know that. So, as long as you leave me, all future dangers will fall on me alone." I stubbornly held his hand and said, "I'm not leaving. You know what? In our past life, we even had children. And I didn't get a chance to tell you." Ethan paused. "Really?" "Well, maybe we have them now." He stiffened, staring blankly at my stomach. "Ethan, I can act with you, but I cannot divorce." A few weeks later, the media reported that the renowned businessman Ethan was suspected of divorcing, and a photo of me moving out of the villa was posted online by netizens on the same day. My best friend Vivian watched me moving my belongings into her apartment, thrilled. "You finally realized and want to start a business with me?" I responded with a cold expression. "Men are unreliable." "Just a few days ago, he was Ethan. What happened between you two?" she asked gossipingly. Irritated by her curiosity, I sighed. "I smeared jam on his bed sheets, just that, and we got divorced." "What are your plans for the future?" "Live on my own." On the third day, I received a call from my uncle. "Emma, come back tomorrow." I held the phone while watering the lilies and laughed. "Uncle, why did you suddenly remember me?" He replied, "You're divorced, and family can't watch you suffer outside. Come back for the banquet. I'll help you find someone." After hanging up, my friend looked at me worriedly. "You cut ties with your parents long ago. What does their family matter have to do with you?" I shrugged. "They always want to harm me." In the evening, dressed in a black fishtail dress, I pushed open the doors of the Smiths' mansion. The banquet hall was bustling with people. As soon as I entered, all eyes turned to me, and whispers began. "Is this Miss Smith? She doesn't have much presence, huh? With no parents to rely on, who do you expect to take care of you? Should we let your son try to climb the Smiths' high branch and skip struggling for a dozen years?" Walking through the crowd, I heard a familiar voice around a corner. I looked over and saw Ethan holding a glass, standing amidst the crowd. He was as radiant as ever. Upon hearing about his divorce, many bosses flocked to him, and female companions surrounded him like layers of protection. "You must be delighted," people noticed me, and the chatter fell silent. "Ethan, how about catching up first?" Ethan glanced at me coldly, retracting his gaze. "No need. We have nothing left between us." I casually picked up a champagne glass from a servant's tray and walked over. Passersby automatically gave way, fearing we might start a fight. Ethan's deep gaze lingered on my moist lips, briefly traveling down my neck and capturing my elegant waistline. For a moment, he forgot his lines. Unable to wait, I splashed the champagne on his clothes and joked, "Just saying hello. Hope you don't mind." He took my empty glass, delicately brushing his fingertips against my hand, and smiled faintly. "I don't mind." Displeased, I hummed and tossed the glass aside, pushing open the doors to the terrace to catch some fresh air. Little did I know, someone was already on the terrace. It was someone I knew, Alex, leaning against the railing, his burned face hidden in the darkness, only half of his handsome face visible. "Emma, long time no see." My eyelashes fluttered slightly, and I tightened the hand hidden behind my back. "Long time no see." He chuckled and said, "Why do we seem estranged?" I tried to ease my nervous tension, taking a deep breath. "So why did you think I disappeared? Where have you been, blocking me on your phone? Can't handle me anymore, huh?" I pushed him as I used to do. Suddenly, the light from outside was obscured by someone glancing over. I saw Ethan leaning casually against the window, watching us. Alex was completely pushed into the shadows. "I had surgery? He leaned forward slightly, and the dim light illuminated his face. "Does my appearance remain the same as before?" I stared blankly at him and after a moment said, "The same. So, what about us?" I took a step back, creating some distance. "I'm happy for you, really." The door abruptly swung open, and my uncle ushered in a group of attendees. "Come, allow me to present my niece, Emma, and Alex, the latest actor in our troupe. They've been acquainted since childhood. Actually, I arranged this banquet to assist them in making a significant life choice." The guests around us lavished us with praises. I scowled. "Uncle, I'm not prepared for this." Alex draped his arm around my shoulder, smiling. "Don't worry, Uncle. I will take good care of Emma from now on." I struggled slightly, noticing his firm hold and feeling a surge of panic. Fortunately, after a short moment, he released me and seamlessly mingled with the other guests. My feelings were mixed. Once Alex concluded his conversation, I inquired, "When did you become involved with my uncle?" Alex nonchalantly straightened his bow tie. "I could only marry you with the Smiths' approval. I had different plans, but your divorce simplified things for me." Observing his expression, I sensed an unnervingly unfamiliar side to him. Alex grinned. "Why? Don't recognize me? Do I not match the Alex you imagined?" Previously, I believed Alex's smile was bright and cheerful, as if we belonged to the same world. Now it seemed I was mistaken. He moved closer, pushing me back step by step until my back pressed against the glass door. "Emma, this is who I am." He forced a smile. In the dim light, it looked rather sinister. "We shouldn't have let this happen, but I love you. As long as you return, we can return to how things were. You wouldn't want to perish with Ethan like before, would you?" I shuddered. Suddenly, intense fear gripped me. Did he know everything? Alex clearly noticed my wide eyes and heavy breathing from fear. Leaning over me, he gently pushed the door handle behind me, opening the door. The joyful sound of violin music from the banquet seeped in, and the light became blinding. Alex smiled, mouthing to me, "Go back. Enjoy the banquet. We'll meet another time." Only when I entered the crowd did I realize I was drenched in cold sweat. The bright, dazzling lights made me dizzy, so I leaned against the stairs, following my recollection, and went up to the second floor. At the corridor's end was the room I used to live in, and I felt compelled to enter and rest. But as soon as I opened the door, someone covered my mouth and dragged me behind it. The familiar scent enveloped me. Ethan's deep voice whispered, tinged with alcohol, "Where did he touch you?" I lost my strength and melted into Ethan's embrace. Shivers traveled lightly through my body. In an instant, a warm kiss landed on my shoulder, followed by intertwined passion. Ethan remained silent, patiently and thoroughly erasing the previous touch with his kisses, ultimately reaching my lips with a gentle nibble. The initial shock and tension dissolved under his comfort, and in the darkness, I kissed him. After a long time, blushing, I softly asked, "Are you jealous?" Ethan's tone was heavy. No one else is allowed to touch you. No one. I pushed him away. I need to go back downstairs soon. With bite marks on my shoulder. What will people think? Ethan frowned, seemingly unconvinced. I replied, they'll say I just got divorced and immediately started seeing Alex. Do you want to hear such idle gossip? After a brief silence, Ethan responded, no, I don't want that. So tone it down a bit, I said, resting my head against his heart. I felt his strong heartbeat and continued. Alex has allied with my uncle, even anticipating my situation and preparing for your actions. Are you confident, Emma? If the Smiths face a significant blow, what will you do? I realized he was worried about that. Holding on to Ethan's large hand, I explained, my parents had a business marriage. They despised each other. When I was born, they sent me to my uncle, separating themselves overseas. My uncle used me as a tool to strengthen the family's power, and if it weren't for you, I might have married a 70-year-old man by now. So, don't worry about me. I intertwined my ring finger with his. I noticed he had reworn his wedding ring, which warmed my heart. If the Smiths were to fall, it would be my uncle's fault, and he deserved it. Over the following months, I returned to working life. Since reaching adulthood, I hadn't received a penny from the Smiths and had supported myself through hard work and frugality, developing a skill to make a living. Apart from being forced by my uncle to return and arrange a blind date with Alex, my life was relatively peaceful. However, Vivian was extremely unhappy about this. You've already severed ties with him. Why do you still follow his orders? I didn't explain. Alex was aware of my situation, and as long as I didn't comply with his demands, he would persuade my uncle to create obstacles for Ethan. Before Ethan could take them down, I needed to maintain stability. Alex even let me choose the date location, and I opted for a busy area in broad daylight, which was relatively safe. Vivian enjoyed watching TV and had recently seen Ethan often appearing on the financial channel. Every time she saw him, she would curse, "What a despicable man, Emma, your second husband must be approved by me before I let you wear a wedding dress." She held the remote control, acting as if she had Parkinson's, pointing at Ethan's handsome face and declaring, "Men like him are no good at a glance. If I let you wear a wedding dress, I might as well remain single for the rest of my life." I crawled out from a pile of design drafts and hesitantly said, "Please don't say that. At least leave yourself an option." "Fine," she responded. Due to Vivian's strong resistance, I had to meet Ethan in secret during deep winter, right after a heavy snowfall. I was wearing a thick sweater and carrying a trash bag as I came out of the hallway. Ethan's car was parked downstairs. It was a cold day, yet he stood outside the car waiting for me, wearing the wool coat and scarf I had bought for him. "Come," he waved. I ran over happily, jumping into his arms and signaling for quiet. "Keep your voice down. Let's go to the car." "What's wrong, my friend? Now you see me as a complete scoundrel." I quickly pulled him into the car. The car's lights went out, casting shadows over the white snow surrounding us. Wrapped in a thick down richarde, I hesitated for a moment before pulling out a pair of wool gloves from my pocket. "These are for you." Ethan smiled, taking the gift seriously. "Honey, I already have plenty of pairs. Don't you like them?" I reached out to take them, but he swiftly pulled them back. "Thank you. I really like them." We didn't have much in common to talk about, but our conversations were endless. I lazily leaned on his shoulder, rubbing against him, and said, "My friend said if a second marriage is with someone like you, she what?" I didn't have the heart to continue, so I dismissed it. But I knew something bad was about to occur. I sighed. I can already imagine her hitting me when she finds out. Ethan laughed and nudged my hand. "Tell you what, would you consider choosing someone else?" "Ethan?" I lightly pushed him. "What are you talking about?" He lowered his eyes and silently held my hand in his. His fingers were long and perfect, big enough to envelop both of mine. "I want to be with you." I sulked, my spirits suddenly dropping. I've been having nightmares lately, each ending with Ethan telling me to live well alone. I wake up crying every time. "Emma, if one day I suddenly leave you," he continued. But my tears fell on the back of his hand, interrupting him. A sigh came from above, and Ethan hugged me, gently patting my head. "I was just illustrating. Even the thought is terrifying. I've never received love from my parents since I was a child, so I tend to like whoever's kind to me. Alex was the same at first, but it changed later. Liking someone brings happiness, but also heartache. My feelings for you go beyond that. I want to make you happy, and when I see others have something, I want you to have it too. I care about what I say, afraid of making you unhappy. My emotions seem tied to you, so if you mention parting, it hurts me a lot. Ethan kissed my hair and sighed. Emma, you love me, so why don't we stay together? I replied. You said you wouldn't refuse my requests, he answered reassuringly, patting my back. All right, we won't part. The next morning, I came out of the bedroom with swollen eyes. Vivian, chewing on a pork patty, asked, Were you crying last night? Get me a popsicle, please. She got up to fetch water, taking out a pork patty and repeating, Were you crying last night? Get me a popsicle, please. She retrieved a pack of ice from the lower shelf of the fridge and pressed it against my eyelids. I saw you getting into a luxury car last night. I applied the ice without responding. She raised an eyebrow. Did you let your old lover humiliate you? Crying in bed every day, looking at your pitiful state. It's not like that. He's actually decent. Stop. She shook her head. Don't you dare say anything good about him in front of me, or I'll kick you out. I stopped struggling. She handed me a glass of water, patting my back. Dear me, what's wrong with you? Please don't scare me. Should I call an ambulance for you? I grabbed her arm. Don't. Do you even know how terrible your complexion looks? I held on to her and said, I'm pregnant. She suddenly stopped. What? A few minutes later, she dragged me into a taxi. Alex called me. Emma, where are you going? It occurred to me that I had a date with him today. Sorry, I have an emergency. Where are you? I'll send you the address. Vivian knew I didn't like him, so she snatched the phone and turned it off. It's a big deal, keeping it a secret. Don't tell your relatives. I'm afraid the Smiths might find out. She sulked and didn't want to talk to me, but later she asked, Are you really going to keep the baby? Yes, I'll keep it, I replied. You have it, and I'll be the aunt to your child. Women can handle half the sky. They can raise a child on their own. The radio was playing news in the taxi. We listened quietly for a while, lost in thought. The Smiths were in trouble. It was reported this morning, involving a severe workplace safety incident that had occurred a long time ago. Ethan's company was implicated as a former partner and was also affected. My friend held my hand, anxiously looking at me. I shook my head. It's nothing. I hadn't anticipated Ethan moving so quickly, especially with the other scandals involving the Smiths being exposed one after another, like straw piled on a camel's back, waiting for the final straw to make the camel collapse. Thinking back to my past life, where my uncle, as the mastermind, instigated the factory explosion, I had been anxious for a long time, but now I was gradually letting go. This time, it was 10 years early. Ethan's business empire was at its peak, and my uncle's influence hadn't yet grown to a terrifying extent. So, hopefully, such a disaster wouldn't occur again. There weren't many cars on the road today, and the driver was maintaining a steady pace. As we crossed half the journey, my eyelids grew heavy. I decided to rest briefly on Vivian's shoulder, thinking she would wake me up upon arrival. Before I could hear her response, I slipped into unconsciousness. For a while, a voice seemed to come from a distant place. Emma, wake up! The harsh sound of metal scraping against something jolted me awake from my slumber. I felt heavy in my limbs, slowly opening my eyes. I saw cement pipes and Vivian leaning against them. The wind blew, carrying the pungent smell of industrial oil and sand. I clung to the ground in a daze. Vivian futilely kicked her legs as a creaking sound came from her bindings. Hurry! Untie me! Realizing that we were in an unfamiliar place, both bound, I quickly walked over and knelt down to inspect the rough hemp ropes binding her. Memories flooded back, and I suddenly looked around. Cold sweat ran down my back. Wasn't this the abandoned factory where I met my tragic end in my past life? The ropes were tied in a dead knot, impossible to undo except by wearing them down. The squeaking noise of the metal bars echoed throughout the building. Vivian cursed. They kidnapped me. They clearly don't want to live. After struggling for a while, the ropes didn't seem to loosen. She slumped against the concrete slab, saying, Emma, stop struggling. They tied me up, not you, which means they're targeting my family. With no one around, you should run and call the police. I smiled bitterly. I'm sorry, but I'm afraid this time I've dragged you into this. What do you mean? Before she could finish, Alex's voice suddenly came from behind us. Your friend is quite noisy. Vivian peeked to see, so I quickly covered her eyes and faced Alex. She knows nothing. Let her go. Vivian couldn't hold back. I told you clearly, if you dare to kidnap me, my father will know and you won't get away with it. Upon hearing this, Alex's face darkened. I said, you heard us. Our business doesn't need to involve her. With Vivian's political background and her police officer brother, she has always been fearless. If anything happens to her, no one would survive. Alex tossed me a utility knife. Cut the ropes and don't you move. Anyone who does will not leave here alive. I hastily took it and freed Vivian from her bindings. Don't look at anything. Go home! Vivian frowned, whispering, could this be a trap? I whispered back, go ahead and call the cops if you want. I just have a feeling these people are at their end. They're not afraid of the police anymore. Remembering the explosion from my past life, I pushed my friend. If one of us can escape, it's one less casualty. She grabbed my shoulder. Emma, wait for me. I'll make sure the police come to rescue you. After she finished speaking, she stormed out without looking back. It was just me and Alex in the empty room. I stood up, meeting Alex's dark eyes. What are you planning? I asked. Why did you go to the hospital? He retorted, stomach ache, need medicine. I replied, but Alex smirked and grabbed me, dragging me to the window. He held my chin and forced me to look down. Let's see who's here. Downstairs, a man was being held at gunpoint by Uncle. I immediately recognized Ethan, and my heart skipped a beat. Alex chuckled. When the police arrive, they'll find Ethan's body. Even your uncle won't be able to escape. My heart raced, my fingertips turned cold, and I trembled slightly. Showing too much concern for him at this moment would only be more dangerous. I closed my eyes. We are divorced. Whatever happens to him is none of my concern. Is that so? Alex coldly looked down at the scene below and said, Uncle, shoot his leg. A gunshot echoed through the room, and blood oozed from Ethan's thigh as he knelt down, looking pale as he glanced in our direction. Alex, I'm here. Let her go. I pleaded. Ignoring me, Alex said to me, Emma, are you happy yet? I felt a chill run through me. With a pale face, Alex's eyes were cold and menacing as he provocatively stared at Ethan. The next moment, he lifted my chin and kissed me forcefully, his cracked lips pressing against mine. The fierce strength made me nauseous, and I struggled involuntarily. Do you want him to die? He asked as I froze in place. Alex firmly pressed his lips against mine, grinding against me. Feeling sick, I pushed him away, knelt on the ground, and vomited violently. Act! Alex ordered coldly. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out downstairs, leaving my mind blank. I crawled to the window, fearing the worst for Ethan, but to my surprise, it was Uncle who was shot in the back, lying on the ground. Ethan's left hand was bleeding, a haunting sight. From the moment he climbed to the second floor, his eyes had been fixed on me, as if fearing something bad might happen. Alex pulled me back a few steps, hiding behind a concrete pillar on the second floor. Outside, the police were shouting at Alex. He hadn't expected the police to arrive so quickly. Alex held me hiding in a blind spot where the sniper couldn't see and shouted, I have explosives in my hand. Get Ethan to come see me or I'll take her with me. Struggling to breathe, I could feel the world spinning around me. Alex, calm down, I said weakly. I was calm in my past life when you chose to die with Ethan. Why can't I do the same? I desperately tried to push his hands away. You think he can defeat me? No matter how well he protects you, what's the use? Even if you don't come out, I can still break in and take you away. I've been waiting for this day for so long. Today, either he dies or you die. Ethan seemed oblivious to our whispered conversation. Put the knife away from her, and I'll wear it, he said calmly. I stood there, too scared to take another step. I'm not afraid of death, but choosing Ethan at this moment would only escalate Alex's emotions. It might even trigger the bomb prematurely. Emma admitted, "You only love yourself? You're as selfish and heartless as your uncle." Alex sneered, making snide remarks. Ethan retreated to the window, giving me a meaningful glance before speaking. "Alex, I'm sorry about your father. Don't you dare mention my father. He violated the rules back then, didn't wear a helmet, and we compensated accordingly." Alex was angered by Ethan's mention of his father's actions. Taking a step forward, he said, "You rich kids born with a silver spoon, do you have any sincerity? But your father indeed broke the rules back then, didn't wear a helmet, and we gave the appropriate compensation. Shut up." Ethan spoke in a cold tone, taunting Alex. "You're just another ineffective individual." My body trembled uncontrollably. It felt as though the world had lost its sanity. Every statement Ethan made seemed to strike a chord within Alex. Was he contemplating suicide? Alex appeared to reach for a lighter out of thin air and threw it onto the ground, instantly setting off a fire. The air was thick with the oily scent from the fuel Alex had poured earlier. "You've destroyed my life," he declared, his eyes reddened. Alex advanced toward me, his partially healed face now looking menacing amidst the flames. "Emma, why didn't you choose me? If only you had told me that you didn't like deformities, I wouldn't have harmed myself so drastically." A bucket of cold water drenched him. It was truly him. "You're insane," he responded. "Without doing this, how could I have manipulated your guilt to extract information about Ethan after years of concealing it?" Alex finally showed his paranoid and deranged side. His laughter, resembling a broken bellows, was harsh and unbearable. "Emma, if you had chosen me, it wouldn't have ended like this. It's your own fault for pushing things this far. Come with me to hell." He produced a remote control. Without a second thought, I turned and threw myself onto Ethan, embracing him tightly. "Emma!" Ethan shouted angrily, but moments later, an explosion occurred. The shattering of glass overwhelmed all other sounds. My ears rang, and the piercing noise felt like needles stabbing my brain. I saw Ethan's pale face, attempting to communicate something, but I felt as though I had been shattered into fragments, numb and weak, yet I didn't fear dying alongside him, or did I? Then why was I crying? The deafness was fleeting, and the next moment, the overwhelming sounds of sirens and shouts flooded my ears like an atomic bomb. "Suspect has been neutralized. Body found on the second floor of the old factory. A team report confirms the explosive device is intact, and the hostage is safe. No other suspicious explosives were located at the scene. The fire is spreading rapidly. Notify all personnel to evacuate with the hostage immediately." I was being escorted away, and as I glanced back, I saw Alex lying lifeless on the ground, a hand covering my eyes. The cold air dissipated the smell of smoke from my nostrils. The blaring sirens and flashing red and blue lights mirrored the setting sun. My legs gave way, and I sank to my knees in the snow, trembling. Vivian's scolding voice now sounded melodious. In a 21st century rule of law society, they still toy with explosives. Lock up all these lawless criminals, give them life sentences or the death penalty, spare none. Brother, don't let them go free. All right, go check on Emma, we'll handle the rest, Vivian instructed someone. She noticed me kneeling in the snow and called out, "Emma, get up. You have a child now. Stop crawling on the ground." Ethan, who was assisting the police in dismantling the bomb, suddenly stiffened and locked eyes with me before swiftly removing his richardé. Without a word, he lifted me up while I was still conversing with my friend and carried me toward the car, his expression devoid of emotion. "What kind of person are you, not even greeting me properly?" Vivian's protests were silenced by the sound of the car door shutting as Ethan and I boarded. He shoved me into the back seat, then sat down and stared at me with a dark expression. Suddenly, fear gripped me, and I curled into a corner. "Please don't do this. I'm scared." "Scared, yet you dared to throw yourself at me? You think this is a game?" After a brief pause, he unleashed a harsh tirade. Ethan had never spoken to me so sternly before, and tears immediately welled up in my eyes. "The bomb is on me," he declared fiercely. What if Alex had pressed it? What would we have done? Seeing he was about to continue, I closed my eyes and collapsed into his arms. Oh no, I scared myself unconscious. Ethan paused, took a deep breath, his forehead veins pulsating, and suddenly held me tightly. It was then I noticed his hands were trembling. I'm sorry, my tone was uncalled for earlier. He ruffled my hair, attempting to calm down. I was actually planning to jump out of the window. That way, even if the sniper failed, the explosion wouldn't harm you. But why did you rush to hug me? I've never seen you exert so much strength before. I didn't think about it that much. I recalled from TV that in bomb situations, one should lie down, but I couldn't possibly embrace Alex. Could I? My words left Ethan momentarily speechless, unsure of how to respond. My words left Ethan momentarily speechless, unsure of how to respond. Thankfully, we were both still alive. Are your wounds all bandaged up? I asked. Yes, he replied. I don't believe you. Show me, Emma. They're on my thigh, he chuckled. I rolled up his pants without hesitation. We're an old married couple. Why are you shy? Vivian's voice came through the window, muffled and distant. Yes, my friend might be a victim of domestic abuse. Her man took her away, she spoke while opening the car door. Light streamed in as I knelt on either side of Ethan's thigh, my hands on his belt as I began to undo it. Vivian held up her phone, staring at us expressionlessly for 3 seconds before suddenly closing the door. During our wedding ceremony, Vivian sat at the head table, barely touching her food. When it came time for toasts, Ethan spoke politely. Emma always talked about you before. She mentioned that if I were her second spouse, something bad might happen. Under his probing gaze, she recalled her bold words from back then. If you were my second spouse, she glanced at me. We exchanged a wordless glance. I had just casually mentioned it, not expecting Ethan to remember it so well. Vivian smiled, raised her glass, and said, It's all in the past. Here's a toast to both of you. May you have a long and happy life together. Ethan smiled slightly. Thank you. After the toast, I followed closely behind Ethan, muttering, Why bring up the past like that? I was just curious, he replied. Really curious? I hesitated for a moment, then grinned mischievously and leaned closer. I'll tell you a secret, I whispered to him as he leaned in. Ethan's eyebrows raised slightly, a hint of amusement in his eyes. I laughed so hard at the thought. If she had actually done that and pulled me in, what would we have done, Mr. Serious? Do you still have a face left? Laughter echoed through the hall joyfully. Ethan looked at me with warm eyes that could melt any heart as the wedding reception concluded. Guests enjoyed themselves at the seaside resort in the evening. I removed my wedding dress and donned loose clothes, wearing a wide-brimmed hat to shield myself from the sun. Holding Ethan's hand, we joyfully strolled along the sandy beach. You always said you'd accompany me to the seaside, yet you never came before. When you say before, you mean? I teased. Oh, you mean the 38-year-old you? Ethan furrowed his brow, feeling a bit old. No, you're not old, I playfully pouted. The 38-year-old you is still handsome, even more alluring. With a touch of silence, the 38-year-old Ethan had gained a sense of composure that made him undeniably attractive. Lost in thought, he seemed distracted as we conversed by nightfall. As I entered the bedroom, I was suddenly seized by a dangerous aura emanating from behind. The warmth of a chest pressing against me caused a shiver. I was being held captive. In a seductive tone, Ethan questioned, Do you think that old man understands you like I do? I was taken aback, realizing why he had been distant all day. He was jealous. I burst into laughter. Hey, you! Ethan grasped my chin, staring into the mirror with eyes that seemed to have a hidden hook. Are you influencing me? He lightly teased. That's beyond his capabilities. Are you defending him? His tone clearly showed his jealousy. No, I'm not, I replied, feeling helpless. Do you really want to prove yourself capable of this even 10 years later? Ethan paused, then solemnly said, In principle, maybe. Refusing to engage in our dispute, he observed my reflection in the mirror emotionlessly, expressing a desire for that old man to see. I covered my face in embarrassment, murmuring, Let's not talk about it. Ethan silenced me with a kiss, passionately stating, Emma, you are mine. That night, perhaps the peak of my emotional intelligence in a lifetime, I had to admit that he was more impressive than the 38-year-old man. Yet he continued to reassure me of his past allure. As the night grew late, moonlight filtered through the window, casting a glow on his profile. Ethan had fallen asleep. I gently touched his face, feeling warmth in my heart. Over the years, I had often held hands with the 38-year-old Ethan, wishing we had been together earlier. But for 10 long years, we had been two agonized strangers. During those 10 years, I must have also felt something stir within me. In the late night, when he quietly covered me with a blanket, there were moments when I wanted to hold him tight and say, "Let's reconcile." However, Alex's accident had become a thorn in my heart. Those feelings I hesitated to acknowledge began to resurface, reminding me that Ethan had hurt my loved ones. Perhaps after being suppressed for so long, when the misunderstanding cleared, a surge of love emerged, taking us through a brief yet romantic period of infatuation. I found myself liking him more than I had realized. "Emma, why are you awake?" Ethan's voice, tinged with hoarseness from sleep, reached my ears. Cupping his face, I leaned in and placed a very light kiss on his lips. "I love you." Beneath my palms, Ethan's heart began to beat wildly, once again. This man just couldn't help but be alluring. "I love you too," he said, pulling me into a deep and irresistible kiss. His sudden passion left me defenseless. "What's gotten into you?" I asked. "I just had a dream," Ethan replied, opening his eyes. Emotions swirled within them like an impending storm about to break. "I dreamt of our past lives," he confessed. I held my breath. "Really?" Brushing aside my disheveled hair, he looked at me as if I were a treasure, saying, "Emma, I'm grateful we have a chance to start anew." The night was still young, moonlight shy, the breeze lingering, the warm fragrance hanging in the air, the fluttering window curtains colliding with the sound of wind chimes. It was the heartbeat echoing continuously. I became a gentle sea, embracing him, softly whispering, "Since when did you start liking me?" "Are we getting married?" He replied, "No, I've liked you for a long, long time." "Boss, it's your birthday today. Aren't you going home?" The secretary peeked into the office, adorned and carrying her bag, seemingly ready for a date with her boyfriend. Hesitant to leave before the boss did, Ethan emerged from the sea of documents, but his thoughts were elsewhere as he realized the one phrase he had been waiting for hadn't come. Glancing at the coal box meal on his desk, he felt a sense of weariness and made a call home. Just a few hours earlier, he had told the nanny that he wouldn't be coming home that night. With the cooling weather, he didn't want Emma to worry and rush out because of him. "Mr. Ethan, will you come back for dinner?" the nanny asked. "And where is Emma?" "She's gone out." The nanny hesitated, then said, "Madam, she's gone." "All right, got it." He hung up. Ethan sat there, lost in thought, gazing into the empty office. Opening Instagram, Alex's taunts appeared right on cue. Ethan, like a masochist, stared at the photos repeatedly. Emma's hand lighting candles, presenting the cake, preparing gifts, and the blue roses. Ethan thought to himself, "I've had that too." When he thought about it, he had known Emma longer than Alex had. It was just that Emma didn't know. The first time he met her, she was just a little girl, crying in the bushes. That afternoon, after being scolded by his stepmother, Ethan sat in a rocking chair next to the bushes, soaking up the sun. The little girl poked her head out of a hole in the hedge, tearfully asking, "Big brother, did you hear me crying just now?" Looking at her tear-streaked face, Ethan pulled out a tissue. "Why were you crying?" His arms bore a large red burn patch from being scalded by his stepmother with hot water earlier. He thought to himself that he was someone of a wild child too. After a moment of silence, he pulled out a piece of candy. "It's okay, I won't make fun of you," he said, offering the candy. With candy in hand, Emma soon forgot all about her tears. Emma was particularly easy to coax. She knew that the older brother next door had candy, and when she felt wronged, she would sneak over. Later, she had burnt ointment and plasters in her pocket, calling it a reward for Ethan. One sunny afternoon, Emma squatted next to Ethan, watching the new wounds on his body, and asked, "Brother, why do they always beat you?" Ethan replied, "Probably because they hate me." Since his mother died and his father remarried, Ethan had never had a good day. He had endured this for so long, not knowing when he would see the light. Perhaps he should have died from a beating at some point, never to wake up again. "I think you're great." Emma sensed his emotions, hugged his leg, patted it, and said, "I like you." The strength of this sentence was as light as a feather. Looking into Emma's clear and innocent eyes, Ethan's heart ached for a moment, as if something had come back to life inside him. He thought, if I died, would she be sad? After that, he started to resist. That place became their secret base. Emma celebrated his birthday once. The flattened small cake, accompanied by broken candles with fire soaked in water, unable to spark. Emma cried in dismay. "I hate Uncle. He lied to me." But Ethan held the cake like a treasure and said, "Thank you. I really like it. There couldn't have been a better birthday." "Gift than this." Emma was full of guilt. She hugged Ethan, kissed him softly, and said, "Brother, happy birthday. Always be happy." From that moment, Emma promised to buy him a big cake. Ethan remembered the sentence and constructed a beautiful scene in his mind. For him, it was like a dream that was hard to reach, sweet and beautiful. Emma also said that the next day she would give him a big gift, and he must wait for it. That night, he was beaten again. This time, his stepmother had drunk too much and lost control. Ethan lay on the ground, his vision darkening, vomiting blood. His usually indifferent father finally got angry. Ethan listened, feeling desolate. Since his mother's death, no one in the family had cared about him. His father feared he would die at home and cause gossip, so he arranged for him to be taken to a hospital abroad overnight. Ethan held onto his father's trouser leg and said intermittently, "Can we leave tomorrow?" He still remembered Emma's instructions and the unfinished promise, but his pleading words fell on deaf ears. He didn't know what life would be like without his Emma, so he made an effort. After many years of planning, he returned from abroad and took over the family business. He used all means to marry Emma. On the day of their wedding, the girl he had yearned for was cold toward him. It was only then that Richard revealed the truth. It was all his fault. The artist that he sent was the one who had the accident on the way. He never thought the child would care about this incident so much. No one had ever told him. He thought that by marrying Emma, he was saving her. In Emma's eyes, he was a villain who used his power to force her to marry him through Uncle Song. He was completely wrong. Emma had someone she liked now, named Alex. Ethan still went to the hospital. The divorce agreement was left on the passenger seat. Watching Emma come out of the hospital, he said, "Unwillingly, today is my birthday too. The promised big cake and birthday gift from years ago." Ethan wanted to try again. As expected, Emma avoided him at all costs. When she spoke, she didn't even want to look at him. The words "let's divorce" got stuck in his throat, and he couldn't say them. Ethan found many excuses for himself, like the big cake she had promised before. She hadn't given it to him yet. Wait until she remembers and fulfills the promise, he thought. Then it would be better to let go. But as he waited and waited, he never waited for it to happen. They seemed to become strangers living under the same roof. Ethan knew she loathed him, so he rarely returned home. One day, it rained outside, and Emma's name suddenly appeared on his phone. Ethan couldn't believe it, feeling lost. He opened his phone to see a very short message. "Are you coming home today?" His lifeless heart suddenly came alive. He hesitated for a moment, wrote, "Yes," then deleted it and wrote, "What's wrong?" Nothing much. After that, there was no more communication. Ethan began to regret it to the extent that he was distracted in meetings. After work, he returned home, hesitated after parking the car downstairs. Wait a little longer until Emma falls asleep so there won't be another argument. There was music in the car. He held the steering wheel, his wedding ring on his ring finger gleaming in the dark night. His heart felt bitter. A long time later, he pushed open the door. In the night, the housekeeper heard the noise, came out and said, "You're back." Then she gestured for him to be quiet. "Madam is asleep on the sofa," she added, frowning slightly. Ethan asked, "On the sofa?" He looked over to see a small, dark shadow curled up in a corner of the sofa. The blanket slipped to the floor. "You're still waiting until now," the housekeeper said quietly. His heart tightened. "Why?" he asked. The housekeeper mentioned the cake on the table. But I kept it for you. Madam made it herself, planning to send it to your company tomorrow. Ethan looked at the cake on the table. But I kept it for you. Madame made it herself, planning to send it to your company tomorrow. Ethan looked at the cake with a missing piece, and a sudden warmth flowed into the cracks of his heart. It hurt, but he willingly indulged in it, feeling the torment. Ethan knew that he could no longer bring up the divorce. Emma's small gesture was enough to break down his walls. Then murmurs came from the sofa. Someone moved suddenly. Ethan immediately froze, feeling exposed like a ghost under the light. Nowhere to hide. When Emma's gaze met his, she paused for a moment. The two of them looked at each other in silence. Only the housekeeper was talking. Mr. Ethan just came back and hasn't eaten yet. I see there's a cake on the table, just for you. Emma, who had just woken up, hesitated for a moment, then grabbed the blanket and stood up from the floor, walking barefoot through the living room. Ethan wanted to remind her to wear shoes, but he felt he had no right, so he remained silent. As Emma walked past him, she hesitated briefly before awkwardly remarking, "The cake is too sweet. I don't like it. You can have it." She then proceeded into the bedroom, shut the door with a definitive click, and even locked it behind her. The housekeeper was puzzled and turned to Ethan, asking, "What do you think, Mr. Ethan?" Ethan sighed quietly and responded, "Cut me a piece. I'll eat it and leave." To his surprise, the cake wasn't overly sweet. It was just perfect. The rich milk aroma boldly mingled in his mouth. The texture of the cake was soft and ideal. Although he wasn't fond of the fruits on top, he forced himself to eat them. After consuming 2 slices, Ethan reluctantly got up. The housekeeper swiftly retrieved a takeaway box, packed the remaining cake, and handed it to him. Ethan attempted to decline, but the housekeeper insisted. "Take it, Mr. Ethan. It's something you'll enjoy. Madam will be pleased." Ethan considered that this kind of life might not be so bad after all. He still had a home, and many familiar people had advised him that life shouldn't be forced. It was easy to find someone indifferent to a divorce, yet Emma continued to wear their wedding rings and never spent nights away. She just couldn't grow closer to him, especially since he was responsible for her ex's death. It wouldn't be fair for him to let her bear the stigma of being divorced. So Ethan made the best of a bad situation and maintained their marriage for many years. In their 7th year, work-related issues began to surface as the company faced a crisis. He used to have time to care for Emma, but lately he felt overwhelmed. One day after a meeting, he realized he had missed a call from Emma. When he returned the call, Emma said, "It's okay, you're busy." She seemed worried. He called the housekeeper, who mentioned that Emma had a stomachache earlier but had already seen a doctor and was feeling better. Then he overheard the housekeeper muttering something about Emma being busy with a studio project with a friend, under significant stress, and not in a good mood. The doctor had diagnosed her with stress-induced gastric ulcers and advised her to manage her emotions. Ethan reflected deeply. He could be completely accommodating and buy her whatever she wanted, but he couldn't offer her emotional support. Emma despised him. After some inquiries, his secretary suggested, "What about getting her a puppy?" He thoughtfully chose a fluffy white puppy that reminded him of Emma from her childhood. The puppy was gentle and affectionate, happily wagging its tail in his arms. Ethan felt relieved, believing Emma would appreciate it. As expected, the housekeeper called that day saying that Emma had spent the entire afternoon playing with the puppy, bought plenty of dog food and canned treats, and even tried knitting a scarf for it. "You really understand her," she remarked. Alex's Instagram hadn't been updated for days, and Ethan thought perhaps the little dog had captured Emma's attention. A truly wonderful puppy. One evening after a dinner party, Ethan became intoxicated and, driven by some strange impulse, returned home. That night, the dining table was filled with married men. During the banquet, Emma's phones never stopped ringing, and some guests complained, unable to hide their pride. Ethan wondered why he couldn't be allowed to go home too. He staggered and pushed open the door, fumbling in the dark. In the past, when he occasionally stayed overnight, Ethan would lie on the couch. This time, following a familiar path, he accidentally knocked something over and heard an angry, distressed bark from the dog. The lights flicked on quickly, revealing Emma, still half asleep in her pajamas, standing in the living room. The little dog whimpered and approached her as if to complain. Ethan, still wearing his shoes, stepped onto the carpet, his ankle tangled in a mess of yarn from Emma's handiwork that he had kicked over. He hung his head, feeling guilty, and remained silent. It was Emma who reacted first, frowning and shooing the dog away before approaching Ethan and asking why he hadn't announced his return. Taking a step back, Ethan replied, "I smell bad. Don't come near me." He had been drinking, and his speech was slurred. Emma knelt down, asking him to lift his foot and sit on the couch. Ethan complied obediently, allowing Emma to care for him. She removed the tangled yarn from his foot, her thin nightdress almost transparent, revealing her slender figure. Ethan closed his eyes and remained silent as Emma tidied up and returned to the living room with a cup of hot water and hangover medicine. "Are you feeling any better now?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Thank you. I'll rest for a bit and then leave." Emma curtly replied, "You don't have to. I'll get you a blanket. You can sleep here. Be careful when you use the bathroom at night. Don't knock things over again." The little dog barked a couple of times menacingly, and Emma dragged it away, muttering, "Stop barking. Daddy needs to sleep." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He was the dog's father. He had heard Emma refer to herself as Mommy to the little dog before. In the early hours of the morning, Ethan sat cross-legged on the carpet, knitting a neck warmer for the dog. Initially resistant, the dog eventually grew tired and lay down beside him, displaying a good temper. Ethan clumsily followed the tutorial, fumbling as he said, "Daddy is knitting you a neck warmer so you won't feel cold." Emma heard the commotion, came back out, and couldn't help but laugh at the scene before her. However, due to his drunken behavior, Ethan didn't remember what happened next and hadn't returned home for several days. They silently agreed to never mention that incident again, but Emma began to treat him differently afterward. She started calling him once a week, asking him to take the dog for vaccinations or to play with it. Ethan was content, thinking things were fine as they were. However, life showed him that they could be even better. After a drunken revelation by Richard one night, with Emma present, Ethan discovered the truth. This unexpected turn of events had been orchestrated by her uncle. It happened in the 9th year of their marriage. That night, as they were leaving the villa, Emma squatted by the roadside, crying. She tearfully apologized to Ethan and even mentioned divorce. Ethan helped her into the car, unsure of Emma's intentions. Did she really want to divorce him? If so, he felt resigned to accept it like a convict awaiting execution. He had been with Emma for a decade, and that was enough for him. If she wanted to leave, he should let her go. He carried Emma to the bedroom and lay on the couch, closing his eyes and waiting for morning to come. Then he felt a soft, feather-like kiss and abruptly opened his eyes to see Emma looking startled. She tried to escape, but Ethan grabbed her. Almost pleading, his trembling voice asked, "Emma, please explain. Don't leave like this without clarity." Emma squirmed a bit, but didn't break free or dare to turn around. After a moment of silence, a weak and hesitant voice came out. "What if I like you? Would you hate me?" Ethan was stunned, feeling like he was dreaming again. "I wouldn't," he said. "I'd be very happy if you liked me." This was something he could only say in a dream. What followed was beyond his control. Emma embraced him, showering him with kisses, and he complied, fulfilling her every request like a loyal dog, loving her devotedly without expecting anything in return. Emma's hot tears, hoarse and tender voice, and emotional intensity overwhelmed him, shattering all his rationality. He descended into a world of tenderness, his soul joyfully howling. He uttered the most audacious plea of the past decade. "Emma, please love me." The surreal dream lasted until dawn, when Ethan regained consciousness. At that moment, he fell into despair. He had dreamed once more, a dream of unattainable pain that felt like 1,000 pricks stabbing his heart. But in the unbearable agony, a muffled muttering reached his ears. Ethan's pain abruptly ceased. Opening his eyes, he saw the morning light gently illuminating Emma's sleeping eyelashes, her forehead resting on her arm as she breathed softly. Ethan blinked in disbelief, cautiously lifting Emma's soft hair to wake her up, which startled her. As she met his gaze, Her face turned red, and she quickly buried herself under the blanket. Both of their heartbeats quickened. Inside and out of the blanket, after a long moment, Emma reached out from under the covers, hooking her pinky finger with his through the gap. She cautiously asked, "Should we have breakfast together?" At that time, Ethan was 38 years old. From childhood to middle age, he had waited for Emma during lonely years. Therefore, as the flames engulfed them, Ethan refused to take another step. He didn't want to continue waiting for Emma in a life without her. It would be too bitter. In the moment of the explosion, he held Emma tightly, hoping that in their next life, they would be together from the start. In the afternoon, on a sun-soaked golden beach, Emma, wearing sunglasses and holding a coconut bowl, hid under a parasol. She claimed to be sunbathing, but she was actually well covered. Her swimsuit mostly concealed her skin, except for her pert buttocks, which were slightly visible, adorned with cute dancing ducks. She had been lying there for a while, for the past half hour. A group of lively girls nearby had been gossiping about the men digging for shells on the beach. "He's so handsome. His body is really good. Have you seen the watch on his hand? It's expensive. I'm smitten. What do you think he likes?" Emma unconsciously joined their conversation, mentioning, "He likes beautiful women." Everyone fell silent, surprised, and stared at the girl who had just spoken. "What kind of beautiful women?" Emma pondered and replied, "Fit ones, sweet-talking ones." The girls exchanged glances, finally looking at Emma and urging her to go ask him while sipping her coconut water. Emma set it down and boldly approached Ethan, saying, "Handsome Ethan," who had been looking at shells, instantly turned his gaze to her, waiting for her to speak. Pointing to a group of beautiful women not far away, Emma asked, "They asked me to inquire about your preferences." Ethan's eyes remained fixed on Emma. Calling her his preference? "You're so straightforward. Can I have dinner with you tonight?" He smiled and agreed. Emma, accompanied by the nearby group, engaged in a brief conversation with the man before being led away by him. Is it that simple? On Emma's side, she led Ethan away from the risky setting, then peeked into a small bucket, asking, "Are there any red shells in here?" Ethan picked some up. "There are a lot," he remembered. Emma didn't expect him to actually recall her words. She wiped the sand off Ethan's hands, dried them, and told him not to pick them up next time, thinking he liked collecting shells. "It's okay, I like it," Emma acquiesced, squinting and teasing Ethan. "Ethan? What did I say?" Due to his good nature, she had established a rule that if he didn't like something, he had to say it, and even if she liked it, he had to refuse. Ethan paused, nodded, and said, "All right, I won't pick them up next time." Emma lost her temper completely this time. The 6-year age gap caused Ethan to be extra tolerant of her. She wanted to do something he liked, but after observing for a while, it seemed like Ethan only liked Emma. So she came up with a cunning plan. The sea in the evening had a unique beauty. The setting sun gently kissed the sea's surface, casting a blanket of golden scales. Emma chose to have dinner on the private terrace. The flickering candlelight swayed in the gentle breeze. After the dishes were served, the waiters gradually left, leaving the remaining time to them. Emma had applied light makeup and rested her chin in her hand, showcasing her best side from the opposite angle not long after. Ethan felt a dryness in his throat and took a sip of lemon water, secretly reminding himself not to be too abrupt. The person sitting across from him was just the lovely Emma in a duck swimsuit. Nothing more. But in the next moment, Emma across from him gently took off her duck shawl, saying, "It's so hot." Suddenly, Ethan felt like he would always be a subordinate in Emma's matters of love. Who could have imagined that, under the cute duck swimsuit, there was a bikini? As Emma got closer, Ethan could feel the heat radiating between them. She raised a little fan and fanned him, the bells on her wrist ringing melodiously. Ethan closed his eyes, recalling how these bells had accompanied them through countless nights, sometimes lively, sometimes slow. His hand clenched tightly. Emma hadn't eaten yet. She didn't like having an empty stomach, so she had to endure. Ethan opened his eyes, his voice hoarse. "Emma, let's eat." Emma blinked her innocent eyes and smiled, saying, "Yes, I'm actually quite hungry." After saying that, she took a sip of the lemon water that Ethan had also drunk. His mind was suddenly on edge, his rationality faltering. Taking a deep breath, Ethan took Emma's steak and said, "Let me cut it for you." Emma looked at the composed Ethan and inwardly gritted her teeth at how patient he was. She didn't want to ask him directly because Ethan always obeyed her every word. After cutting the steak, Ethan placed it in front of her. Emma didn't move, just stared at him intently. Ethan finally spoke, offering his own steak to her. "Okay, now can we eat?" Emma's gaze became more resentful, wondering if she was about to fail again today. She could clearly see Ethan blushing. "My back is a bit uncomfortable," Emma said, furrowing her brows. Ethan's attention was immediately diverted. Putting down his utensils, he asked, "Where does it hurt?" Emma took the opportunity to pull a chair to sit beside Ethan, turning her back to him and revealing her smooth back, which looked like it had a sunburn. Ethan fell silent, thinking, if he didn't have Alzheimer's, he would remember Emma had been under an umbrella all afternoon and even wore a shawl, but her pitiful tone softened him. Clearing his throat, Ethan asked, "Where does it hurt?" "I don't know." Emma started to act spoiled, murmuring, "It's a large area. You have to touch it to figure it out." Ethan suppressed any ambiguous emotions in his eyes and placed his palm on Emma's back. The delicate hairs brushing against his palm felt like 1,000 silver threads entwining around his heart. Emma let out a comfortable hum without saying a word for a while. Ethan's rough fingers traced the straps on her back a few times. As if truly examining her body, he asked, "Could you apply some repairing cream for me?" Emma handed him a tube of creamy ointment, instructing him, "Apply it over a large area. Don't miss a spot or I'll get sunburnt." Ethan chuckled helplessly, never having heard of someone getting sunburnt while under an umbrella. Still, he followed her instructions, squeezing the cream into his palm, warming it up before gently applying it to her back, as the warm breeze gently caressed them. Ethan found it increasingly hard to bear. Emma's breath seemed to match his movements, tugging at his empty heart. It was unclear if it was the presence of the cream increasing the friction, or Emma's sudden change in position, but at a certain moment, all restraint faded away. And so did the bikini, which fell to the ground along with Ethan's dwindling rationality amid Emma's teasing exclamation. He simply picked her up and carried her into the house. Emma stifled a laugh, saying, "Pretending to be pitiful, I haven't eaten yet. Are you really so cruel as to not feed me?" "It's because you don't want to eat?" Ethan's gaze darkened, his words becoming stiffer. "You seduced me?" "No, I didn't." Emma kicked him and stubbornly retorted, "It's your improper thoughts. Don't blame me unfairly." With a mischievous look, she raised her chin defiantly, displaying a challenging attitude. Something in Ethan snapped. Fiery rage burst out, wanting to retaliate and make her admit her fault through tears. But at the last moment, his bottom line held, reminding him to be sensible and not bully Emma. Ethan heard Emma's voice, like a soft knife, piercing his heart. "If you have nothing to do, I'll go eat now. After dinner, I've made plans to play games with someone, so I might not come back tonight." Before she could finish her sentence, she was pushed onto the bed. The soft bedding enveloped her like clouds. Emma's eyes sparkled, a hint of redness visible, drawing Ethan in. His rationality slipped away completely, and with no more reservations, he kissed her. "You're not going anywhere tonight," he declared. Emma clung to his shoulders, her eyes misting over, still intent on playing. "I don't want to. Don't want it. I want you." Finally, Emma laughed. "You're present. You can unwrap it however you want." Ethan paused, finally understanding Emma's intentions. He sighed and said, "Emma, you're going to drive me crazy. Don't you like it?" "I do, very much." Emma ran her fingers through his hair, and right before he lost his mind, she spoke the words concealed in her heart. "I care about you, and you need to learn to express yourself. Maybe your requests, I can fulfill them too." At that moment, Ethan's soul surged. In a moment of greed, love surged forth. Emma nestled softly in his arms, whispering softly like a priestess, leading Ethan into a realm of enchantment. He was besotted, chasing after her endlessly. In the distance, waves crashed against the shore. Snow piled up, the sky was vast, and the earth wide, but only in this place was his soul truly at home.